Hello, and welcome to this spooky edition of Fiction Fans. I'm Lily.
Are you not going to say a podcast where we read books and other words too?
Well, I feel like people probably know where they are, but that is true. That is what we're doing here today.
You threw me off.
I got really excited about the spooky books, okay?
Fair enough. And I'm Sarah.
Oh, well, despite spooky month, I do still want to start with something great that happened this week.
I have a lot of good things to choose from. I went to a couple of events in the city. I discovered that Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, which is a PS2 game, a PlayStation 2 game that I played a lot, has been ported over to the PS4.
I do believe I introduced you to that game, and I require credit spoken aloud on the podcast.
You did introduce me to that game. Yes.
Okay, I'm done.
I
Thank
think
you.
I think it's quite possible that I played more with your father than I did with you.
Oh, very likely.
You did introduce me to the game. Yes. But the good thing that I was going to use as my good thing is that I took 3 days off of work.
Oh.
So I got yesterday off, and I'm taking today off, and I'm taking tomorrow off.
Well, A, that sounds lovely. And B, that sounds like we can record for as long as we please.
It does mean that. That was part of the reason why I took today off.
Excellent.
So that if things went over the way they sometimes do.
I don't know why you would think that.
It's not like we have a history of going long or anything.
No, we hate hanging out.
Nope. Can't stand each other.
Well, my good thing this week, was it this week? It was definitely since our last episode.
It was last week.
Okay.
I believe.
Well, that's fine. It'll be even longer once this comes out. But our friend Benjamin over at Literature and Lo-Fi created a really sweet list of book recommendations for us. And we wanted to address that later on today, but that was, I mean, like seeing that video notification and our little logo on it. Oh, it made me so happy.
It was very nice. Yeah. Ben is a booktuber. So if you haven't checked him out, you should. His reviews are excellent. His videos are fantastic.
He'll also be participating in Spooky Month with us.
He will be participating in Spooky Month with us quite soon.
Much, I think, to his chagrin.
He had some comments about the book that we're reading. So it'll make for a fun episode.
But like putting that much time into thinking about books we might like, that just made my heart glow. So that was definitely my good thing. Reaching through the weeks, beyond time.
Yes.
And Sarah, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking red wine, although not, I'm afraid, out of an amethyst goblet, the way I should be doing if I was really following in the footsteps of one of the books that we read for Spooky Month.
Excuse me, a skull amethyst goblet.
This is very true. It was an amethyst skull goblet, yes.
I'm also following in the theme of our books tonight. They were both sort of in the similar time period too, huh? I guess not super close, but there's an awful lot of brandy in both of those books. So I got myself down to the grocery store and purchased the only kind of brandy that grocery stores sell. It's Hennessy. That's the only thing they have that's brandy.
It still counts.
It does still count. And I feel very romantic in the poetical sense.
Fitting in with those romantic poets.
Oh, I have a lot of opinions, and we're going to get into that later. Well, as this is a book podcast, Sarah, have you read anything good lately?
I have. Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki came out on the 28th, and I pre-ordered it and read it. I devoured it. It was very, very good. It made me crave donuts and all kinds of food, actually. And I liked it so much that I actually bought a second signed copy. So you get my original copy.
Yes. I gotta say, I am not a signed book person, but I'm so glad that you are.
You have benefited from it a couple of times now.
I should clarify, I love getting books signed, but I'm I'm not the kind of person who goes out and buys a book that has been signed.
Yeah, I am. I very much am.
In case Tamora Pierce is listening and sad that I'm not into my signed copies of the books of hers that I have, because that's clearly a thing that is happening.
Anyway, so that was what I read. Have you read anything good lately?
Have I read anything lately? Work's been a fucking mess. So I haven't read anything fun lately.
Boy, I sympathize with that statement.
I know. We've both kind of been through the ringer, huh?
A little bit.
I think you worse than me overall. But Facebook was down on Monday, which I know you know.
I did know that.
Yeah. So I've been trying to figure out how to explain that to people. What? How does this affect our campaign? It's a 3-month campaign. I promise one day doesn't do dick. Please calm down. And it's not like everyone else got ahead of you. It was down for everyone.
That sounds very frustrating.
It is very frustrating. I've been reading a lot of articles about it. And it's weird trying to fill your brain with something you don't actually care that much about. I love my job, but I don't like Facebook all that much.
That doesn't sound like that qualifies as an answer to the question, read anything good?
No, that's true. It is fun reading. So there's the official, right? Like their internal servers were down, which meant they couldn't even unlock doors with their key cards or whatever, which meant they couldn't get into the server room to fix it.
Everything routes through Facebook, which is a dumb idea.
Yeah. But then there's the conspiracy theories that you stumble upon reading about it. And so that's of course, that's what they're going to say it was. So that was kind of fun. But overall, I much preferred our books for today.
They were good books.
But before we talk about those, Benjamin.
Yes.
What have you done to us? I know he starts off the video by saying he understands we have monster TBRs and doesn't expect us to read any of these. But if you didn't expect us to read them, you shouldn't have picked such good books, Benjamin.
It's funny because of the 5 books that he wrecked, I already had 4 of them on my TBR. So
he knows us so well.
He really does. And he and I have very close taste in books. So I know that I will really enjoy all of these.
I'm really excited. I had not heard about these books before, but I am not as
Should we say what books he recommended?
Sure, yeah.
Do you think that would be
helpful?
Worthwhile? Yeah, helpful.
No, I think people should go watch his video because he's going to do a better job recommending them than I am because I haven't actually read them yet.
It wouldn't be so that we're recommending them to people. It would be just so that people have some sort of context.
Sure.
When we talk about them. We don't have to.
Which were the 4 that were already on your TBR, and then I'll say the one that I have put on my TBR, and I bet that will cover all 5 books.
Yes, that will cover all 5 books. So the 4 books that he recommended that were already on my TBR were The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, Seasons of Albion by Elon Marche and Christopher Warman, The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North, and The Forever Sea by Joshua Philip Johnson.
And as I was watching this video, the one that I had to immediately pause it to write down the title of was Daughter of No Worlds by Carissa Broadbent.
Which does look fantastic.
I like romance, okay? They all sound amazing.
If we could only add one book to the calendar from this list, to the calendar for next year, which book would it be and why?
I mean, Daughter of No Worlds, because it sounds great. And I want to read it. But I feel like I should be more diplomatic and pick one that I think we'll both like. Actually, that's not true. You'd like it.
I mean, I probably would, yeah. I was thinking that The First 15 Lives of Harry August would be a really good one to add, just because the way that he described it, and he was talking about how he really wanted, how he thought we would both have interesting perspectives on it. It made it sound to me like a really good book to discuss. Whereas some of the other books, I'm like, well, I just want to read that. I don't necessarily want to analyze it.
Well, you created a spreadsheet for the next 4 years of podcasting, so I think we can probably fit them in somewhere.
I only added Discworld for the next 4 years.
Oh, okay.
I'm not that much of a madman.
That's pretty mad. It's semi-mad.
It's only a little mad.
Well, as we alluded to briefly, I did convince Sarah to participate in some Halloween festivities with me, which I'm very excited for. Sarah's making a face already.
I am not really a spooky month kind of person.
I know, but that's why we picked books that aren't like hardcore horror. Okay, one of them ended up being much more horror than I expected it to be.
There was a lot of horror, and the other one was very spooky. My entire notes for it were "it's spooky," and I don't do well with spooky.
Well, I didn't ask you to read any Clive Barker with me. Let's just say that.
I don't know who Clive Barker is.
He wrote Hellraiser.
I'm not familiar with Hellraiser.
I'm just saying, I pulled my punches, okay?
I'll take your word for that.
We're okay. As a non-horror fan, were you miserable reading these books or just a little put off?
I wasn't miserable. It's just that like I do a lot of my reading at night, and some of these were, well, so we read 2 books. We read The Apple Tree Throne by Premee Mohamed, and we read The Stress of Her Regard by Tim Powers. The Tim Powers book we'll get into a little more later. I didn't find that scary. I just found it gory. That I was fine reading. But the Apple Tree Throne was spooky, and I do most of my reading at night.
That's the best time to do it.
And it was like, well, I don't want to go to bed now. This is spooky.
And that's why you read another one. You just keep reading horror books until you pass out.
No. No. That sounds like a bad idea.
It's not a good idea. But it is fun.
I'll pass, maybe.
Well, you got a couple more weeks ahead of you. Thank you for indulging me.
I've got a couple more spooky books to read. You're welcome. I love you.
No,
the things I do for you.
Hey, The Apple Tree Throne was a very good book, though.
It was very good. And to be fair, I was the one who suggested it. Mm-hmm. So that's on me.
It was, I think spooky is definitely the right word for it. Like you said, it's very atmospheric and eerie and a little creepy and unsettling, but it's not, horrifying at any moment.
Yeah, it's definitely, I wouldn't consider it horror.
I would, but
I consider it horror in the genre of horror.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
It's not horrifying.
Yeah.
And that is why I'm calling this spooky month, just because I'm not trying to creep you out too bad.
Just a little bit, though.
Yeah. You don't have to go all in. You can participate in some All Hallows Eve recognition without, watching Saw on repeat for 30 days or whatever people do.
Oh boy. That does not sound like a good idea either. But anyway, back to the book, which we should be talking about.
The Apple Tree Throne is pretty firmly a novel, or no, it's a long novella. It is 37,000 words, which makes it like pretty close to that 40K mark, which is the technical definition. So I'm just going to jump right ahead. I know I'm skipping around in our outline, but right up top, I'm going to say, if you want to get into the Halloween spirit and you have like a couple hours to kill in an afternoon, read this book. It's not a huge commitment. It's not like you have to immerse yourself in a terrifying adventure for 2 days. You can just kind of dip in, It's nice. It's just a little like, ooh, I got chills. It's a little bit.
I don't think I have anything to add there.
Nope, that's it. I know I am skipping around, but that's definitely why you should read this book. A little quick overview. So like we said, it's on the shorter side. So I think most of our conversation is going to be after the spoilers because it's just kind of hard to talk about it without spoiling stuff. But it is a sort of alternate kind of magical realism history of England or the Great Republic of Britannica.
Something like that. I don't actually remember what the acronym stood for.
They've abolished the royalty. They have some crazy magic plants that do electricity. And it doesn't go into that very much, which is why I am so very confused about it. But that's okay. It kind of just makes everything a little bit weird.
It was just kind of more for vibes than actual plot.
Yeah.
Like it added to that, like you say, that feeling of weirdness. It's just a little bit off, like one step away from the world that we know.
Exactly. And it takes place, oh gosh, they say the turn of the century. I'm guessing they mean the end of the 1800s.
It felt 1800s-ish.
Yeah. And sort of a not World War I scenario. And there's actually a line that says, if that had gone differently, it could have been a whole world war. So I kind of feel like that's what she was hinting at. But it's about a soldier who has come home after being at war, and mostly about him trying to reintegrate into society, which is more heartbreaking than horrifying. But there's also some ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the spook.
He is literally haunted by the war.
Yeah. And it's very sweet and very eerie. And I think that's all we should say at this point.
It's spooky. Go read it if you like spooky things.
Oh, go read it if you like spooky things. It's only available on ebook or audiobook. And it's a couple bucks. If you're looking for some spooky spirit, just go read this book. It's great.
To avoid spoilers for The Apple Tree Throne, skip to 3814.
So through the power of editing, in that 4-second break, I guess 12-second break, because I gave the spoiler warning, we listened to a 4.5-minute song called The Ghost of Genova Heights by Stars, which, according to the author's note at the end of this book, was the inspiration for the story.
And you really can hear in the song, or see in the song,
you can feel it.
Feel in the song. You can do something in the song to see what aspects of the song she cherry picked for the book.
There are a couple of really strong visuals. Tapping Morse code on the window. That was a big one. The fingerprints being left behind, I feel like, was something.
He liked roses.
Yeah. Other than that, I'm sorry, Mohamed, your book's better.
Yeah, I liked the Apple Tree Throne more than I liked the song, but it was really neat to have them to be able to compare the two.
Yeah, and sort of seeing where it came from and what she created from that is very cool. Anyway, definitely I would say worth listening to before or after you read the book. But I just wanted to include at least our reactions to that because it's cool when someone has such a strong inspiration, right? Like it's directly building off of another piece of media.
Yeah, when someone has such a visceral reaction to a song that they have to go and write a whole 37,000 words inspired by that, like that's neat. It's just cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I did really love the book though.
Despite being a little too spooky for me, it was good.
I think one of my okay. So the main character comes home and we find out that oh boy, this is me not knowing army words. The leader of his group of people.
I didn't actually remember anyone's names, so I did have to look up the book summary. I think it just says Commander. In the summary, it just says Commander.
Well, the person telling other people what to do in this chunk of army, I'm sure there are better words to use, but I don't care enough to look them up, gave bad orders and got most of them killed and himself killed. And so he had a very shameful funeral and is haunting the main character. I would say that's sort of the beginning of the book.
Yeah. Well, the funeral is definitely the beginning of the book.
Right. We don't find all of this out right away. And the main character gets taken in by the dead commander's extremely well-off family, who is completely exploiting him as a veteran to sort of get their clout back because they're a military family and their son was dishonored. And so now they have a young troubled man that they can cart around with his shiny uniform and go, look at this one who is ours. And it's pretty gross. I would say that's like the most horrifying part of the book for me. But
I mean, I have mixed feelings about that. On the one hand, if you ascribe like very self-serving motivations to them, yeah, it's pretty gross. But I think you can take them at their face value, that like they're grateful to Lieutenant Braddock Benjamin.
He was also the only person willing to speak at their son's funeral.
Yeah, like so they're grateful to him for doing that. And they do have this, empty house now that someone might as well use. And,
I don't think they're villains, but I do think they were exploiting him.
I think that
at least the mother was. Some of the descriptions of how she treated him in social situations set off some alarm bells.
I think that she was definitely trying to fill the hole that her son left. Again, I'm not sure whether I think that that's intentionally exploiting him, because it could just be that that's how she treated her son, which is not great.
That's also exploitative. It can be both.
Yeah. But I guess it when you describe it, it makes me think like it's very intentional. And I'm saying it could be exploitation, but not in any kind of intentionally malicious way.
It's not like,
or intentionally considered way anyway.
It's not exploitation like in Get Out, where they're literally using people's bodies and consciousnesses. No. Well,
I haven't seen that.
That's okay.
Either, so
it's a reference I think is normal enough that I can just throw out there. It's just mundane human awfulness. It's not over the top. It's not villainous. It's just kind of some people being a little shitty. The moment where they decided he was getting married to this girl,
yeah,
that was pretty awful.
That's pretty shitty. But I guess what I'm saying is I just took it as like that was how she was, and not that she was doing that for him in particular.
So she's just a bad person at her core. Okay, I can agree with
that. Yeah, like, she's just not great.
I did love that scene in particular because they announce publicly that he had proposed to this young woman, which he had not done.
Who was not the fiance of his commander, but like it was kind of thought that they were engaged.
He had written a letter. His last letter that he wrote was, "When I get home, I want to propose."
Yeah.
And he just stands up and walks out. And I love that. There's oh gosh. There's a podcast, I think it's My Favorite Murder. It's a true crime podcast is the point. And whenever they go over true crime stories, their tagline is "fuck politeness," because that's how a lot of people get caught. And that is what Braddock did. He just said, "No, I'm not going to try to like weasel my way out of this. I'm just walking out. No one's going to stop me," because they were all too polite to kick up a fuss. So no one stopped him from just saying, "Peace out. Smell you later."
It was nice to see him he's been kind of stymied by all of this politeness over the course of the book. And it was nice to see him finally use that against everyone instead of it being used against him.
Well, he's a deeply troubled person. We're seeing...
And has some serious PTSD.
Oh, yeah. That was one of my other comments is, I mean, this isn't a historical example of it, but seeing PTSD or other like psychological situations that today we maybe have a better understanding of how they were portrayed a long time ago is so fascinating, and sort of trying to track that, like these stories of someone who, did such and such, or were quote unquote shell shocked, right? Like that's absolutely just the precursor to PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting to see how our understanding has grown over time. And also to combat maybe some of the rhetoric that people suddenly have psychological issues when no, we just have words for it now.
That was exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. I mean, this is obviously a modern story, but I really liked the way that it was sort of handled in a historically accurate way. I feel like the phrasing and everything they used was very well done.
It felt like this book could have been written in like the early 1900s.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it definitely had that kind of vibe.
Speaking of early 1900s vibes, what was it? Oh no. What was that quote? It was so good. Maybe I could find my note. Oh, so they called it an epidemic of nerves for PTSD.
I would have a lot of nerves too if I had PTSD.
But one of the other phrases used, and this just tickled me, degenerate practitioners of the Greek arts.
Well, that's not talking about PTSD though.
No. We're talking about old-timey euphemisms.
Yes.
That made me giggle. Practitioner. We can drop degenerate, but practitioners of the Greek arts was this is funny. And it also uses I think it's Freudian to call homosexuality an inversion. I'm pretty sure he's the one who started that term in, if I am remembering correctly, an effort to try to normalize it, right? It's not heretical, it's just an inversion, which obviously is outdated at this point. Oh man, so they were together, right? The main character and the commander?
They must have been.
Right? Like they have to have been.
Yes.
We get such tiny breadcrumbs, but I don't know how I could interpret this otherwise.
I feel like the ending of it makes it pretty clear that, yeah, like it's kind of alluded to, but it's alluded to during the rest of the book in a way that you could just ignore or overlook. Mm-hmm. And then by the end, it's like in your face. Yes, they were together.
I actually feel the other way around. So this book ends with the line.
Well, it's something about him putting his fingers to his cheeks.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah. But it's the 19 whatevers, the 1890s. You were allowed to touch other people back then. What is it? You'll come back. Endlessly, till time itself runs out, and the sun is cold, and the earth has ceased to spin. Why, anyone would think we were in love. Fiddlesticks, I cannot imagine why they would say such a thing. I feel like without the context of the rest of the book, that could just be bros hanging out.
But I know how
ridiculous that sounds.
We have the context of the rest of the book. So, I mean, what I'm saying is that, like, you can ignore the hints that are dropped throughout the rest of the book. And then with that scene, it's like, yes, clarifying, yes, they were together. And sure, if you take that scene out of context, maybe you could, it's just bros being bros. But, but when you put everything together...
To me, I think it was really the way they both froze during the flashback to one soldier accusing others of not even being gay, just of being cocksuckers, I think was the official thing he complained about. He didn't want to share a toothbrush, right?
Yeah.
But they didn't have enough toothbrushes. And I think that was actually the moment where I was like, But then good old Clarky just covered up for him and like charged on and started making fun of the guy as you should.
Yeah, I feel like that's not where I started thinking that they were together, but like when Braddock is talking about the color of his commander's eyes and things like that, okay, maybe he just has a good eye for detail. But then, really, I will say, though, one of the points, so his commander, as we've said, is a ghost who is haunting him. And he starts off by being on the outside of Braddock's house, which used to be his house, and not being able to get in. And Braddock just thinks, oh, he's stuck on the outside. It's fine. And then there's this moment where he thinks that, and like the commander's fingers like go through the wall. And oh boy, that was creepy. That was very creepy.
It's so interesting to me how, like, which parts of the horror get us so differently, right? The supernatural stuff, I mean, it's fun. I love it. But I find the horror in being manipulated by people whose charity or goodwill you thought you were living off of, or thinking someone liked you and then being manipulated by them. And his just like horrible depression.
I don't consider that. I mean, it's horrible in the sense that it's very tragic and very sad, but I don't consider that horror. That's just life. Sad life, maybe.
Yeah, life can be horrific.
But like the supernatural is horrifying or, scary.
I feel like for me, it's a situation of what's that dumb phrase we used? A spoonful of Discworld makes the social commentary go down.
I'm pretty sure when you say we, you mean you, because I would not be caught dead saying that.
You liked it at the time. You were probably more drunk then.
I can enjoy hearing it. I would also never say it.
Well, a spoonful of supernatural makes the existential dread of everyday life go down. I think is probably why I like the horror genre to begin with.
Yeah, it's just not my jam.
But you know what this book did have in spades, which made it an absolute delight to read?
Really good friends?
Yeah.
I did love the relationship that he had with his friends. Like that was A+, would read again.
Oh, I would just excerpt those scenes and just read them anytime I have a bad day. Like, even though he is not in a good place, he's still like, they still all love each other so much.
Mm-hmm. And
maybe that's what tricked me, because he and Clarky, well, they're also extremely close and very intimate, but they are clearly just purely platonic friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was sort of coming at his relationship with the commander from that angle, going, this is clearly a man capable of close male friendships, which is a good thing that everyone should have. Oh, wait, maybe they were actually fucking. But it's also really fun that Clarky's wife, Victoria, was actually Braddock's first friend, and that Clarky came in after.
Yeah. It was just a really nice like friend dynamic. And it was refreshing to read about people who really care about each other and who like go out of their way to help each other, even when someone is, not feeling it, really depressed, kind of just wants to sequester themselves away from the world.
And they're very tender bullying of forcing him to come over for not even forcing, but inviting him to come over for dinner because they knew he wouldn't say no, and that way they could make sure he was eating. Just they were good friends, and that's so nice.
Yeah, it was just really nice friendship representation.
And how much he clearly loved Victoria, but again, in a purely platonic way. Like there was no weird triangle stuff there. There was some weird triangle stuff with Rosalind, who was the commander's sweetheart. But, in retrospect, now I'm wondering where the jealousy was coming from. It is weird that they were both into the same girl. That is weird.
No, but I don't think Braddock was really into her.
No. Well, okay, he obsessed over her a lot.
He talks about the color of her hair and being surprised by it, but I took his interactions with her more as this is what is socially expected of me, and not that I'm actually into you.
His actual in-person interactions, yes, but he spends a lot of time imagining their children.
I feel like that's just what was done, though.
Okay.
There was a quote. She is full of amusing anecdotes, witty observations, and literary quotes, and somehow also manages to be the most boring person I've ever met.
Yeah, it's a great quote.
It's a good quote.
But that's when he first meets her. But after she kisses him, which is significantly later on in the book, he spends like 2 days just fantasizing about their offspring. I think that's almost more of a self-loathing expression, because whenever he imagines them, it very explicitly says he's imagining them having nothing to do with him, because what's the point of him continuing on and all this other
that doesn't
extremely dark stuff.
That doesn't sound like someone who's super into her.
No, that's a good point. All right, I take it back. The commander's ghost was right, though. It is weird that Braddock was getting in on his ex-girlfriend.
I mean, the whole situation was a little bit weird, up to and including the fact that the commander's ghost was still around.
Fair enough. So throughout this book, the commander, at the beginning at least, the commander does pull some classic poltergeist shit on Braddock. One of them being, so he gets home and discovers that his room had been not tossed. He says if he hadn't checked the state it was in, he would have thought that maybe he had just left it this way. It's just a little messy. But one of the things that the ghost did was remove the bookmark from his book. And that is pure evil.
That's very much petty bitch kind of actions.
Forget slashing tires. Remove all of the bookmarks.
Yeah. That's way more annoying.
Yeah.
This was just a good book.
It really, I can't stress enough. If you just want to have an eerie evening.
Mm-hmm. Those good October vibes.
Exactly. If it's raining, buy this book. If it's dark out, buy this book.
If it's raining and dark out.
Is there a full moon? Buy this book. If you don't like horror, you might not like this book. I think there's enough sweetness in this book to balance that out, though.
I mean, I think, speaking as someone who doesn't like horror, yes, there is. I think it's worth reading even if you're not really into spooky things. Just maybe read it, when it's bright out, the sun is shining, midday, when you can ignore all of the spooky vibes.
Probably a good idea. I'm very excited for our next book, Sarah.
It was a good book.
I know this is not your usual jam.
Not really, although I have read books by, do I say this author? Do I just say his name?
Yeah.
Well,
no, we're going to ignore who it's written by the entire time.
I asked because you haven't introduced the book yet.
Right. I think we said it at the beginning of the podcast.
That's true. I think you're right, and we did say. But so I've read books by Tim Powers before. This is not my first Tim Powers book.
Me neither. I should say, before we get too far into this conversation, Tim Powers was my teacher for a couple years, a very long time ago.
So you've maybe got some biases.
Yeah, I mean, not on purpose. I definitely have criticisms of the book, don't you worry. But I definitely want to be sincere about that in case there are biases that I'm not realizing. I don't want to mislead anybody.
I mean, I feel like he was never my teacher. I feel like I'd call you out on anything that I noticed specifically.
Yeah, probably.
But it is good to have that disclaimer up front.
Yeah, I just want to be honest. And I know what you're thinking. Lily, that's clearly not true. Otherwise, you would have invited him onto the podcast. Well, listener, he very kindly did an interview for a literary magazine for me many years ago, and I completely forgot to send it to him afterwards. So I am too embarrassed to talk to him now.
We'll change that eventually.
Yeah, I'm getting to it. I'll get there. Okay.
I'm gonna nag you about it.
It's probably entirely in my head. But
yes, probably.
Yeah, but it's there. So did not get over that in time to reach out to him about this episode. It's fine. It's a good book.
Very important first question before we dive into discussing this book. Does it qualify as real person fan fiction?
That is a fair question because several of the main characters in this book are genuine
real
historical
people.
figures. Yes. So you're right. We should probably actually say the title of this book. We read The Stress of Her Regard by Tim Powers, published in 1989. And I would say this whole book in one sentence is, what if the romantic poets were being hunted by vampires?
Yeah, accurate.
That's the book. That's the whole thing. It's not. It's very good. It gets into stuff, and I love the depiction of vampires in this novel.
It was a fun depiction that had a unique take on vampires that one doesn't often see.
But that wasn't your question.
That was not my question.
Is this real people fanfic? I would say no, that this is historical fiction. Because these people have been dead for a long time, that makes it history.
But couldn't one argue that all historical fiction is real person fan fiction if it involves characters who actually lived?
You could argue that, but I think you would be wrong. I do agree that there is overlap in those definitions, but I don't think the spirit of the genre, like, you know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. I feel, and on the one hand, I agree because the romantic poets lived and died a long time ago. And so they probably do qualify as like historical figures. I mean, they're certainly not recent figures.
Was Lord Byron even a real person? I mean, come on.
Well, but on the other hand, something about the inclusion of like vampires of a supernatural element makes it feel to me more like real person fan fiction, because when I think of historical fiction, I think of fiction that is based in reality and doesn't have any kind of like fantastical element. Like I wouldn't necessarily call Outlander historical fiction, for example.
I think you are possibly hitting on the fact that Tim Powers is a genre revolutionary, and like maybe you just can't define all of his works that well.
His works defy all genre expectations.
Not every single genre expectation, but certainly a lot of them.
I mean, I do think that he is a master of combining genres, inventing his own genres.
Yeah, so it perfectly in the way for us to not be able to decide where this lands between real people fan fiction or what I'm going to call historical fantasy, which would be, I think, maybe closer than historical fiction, but it's not actually a thing that I know of.
I don't know if it's a thing. Historical fantasy to me means fantasy that is set in a different time period, but with a different kind of fantastical element, like not necessarily supernatural. Like I would argue that possibly the Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels would qualify as historical fantasy, because not that it involves real people. Well, it involves Queen Victoria, but
so it does. So isn't that also real people fan fiction then?
But she's not a main character.
Yeah, fair.
She's just a bit character.
Well, by the technical definition, this is not fan fiction. It's a published novel.
That's true. It's not. We're not reading it on AO3.
Yeah. So if we want to get like nitty gritty about it, but by that definition, isn't Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter also real
Yeah,
people fan fiction? Okay.
sure. Like I would probably call that real person fan fiction rather than historical fiction.
Yeah.
It's just that to me, historical fiction implies some sort of basis in reality more than just characters that actually existed.
Well, there is, okay, more exposure of the least past. I did do an entire directed independent study on the Romantic poets. And I can tell you that this is extremely accurate to their lives.
I mean,
I assume
yes,
the vampires weren't involved.
So like that's not what I'm arguing. Like, yes, their Powers is very, very good at taking events that actually happened and slotting his vampire narrative like into these real events, right? But what I'm saying is that historical fiction doesn't have any kind of supernatural element to it or fantastical element to it.
So is it really just that you don't think fantasy can be called fiction? Is that your problem with the name?
Huh. That's a good question.
I think fiction is an umbrella term for anything not real, and fantasy is just a slot underneath it. Like, it's vague, sure.
In that case, why do we have different fiction and fantasy genres?
Because like people want to know what they're doing.
Fantasy isn't shelved under the fiction umbrella in a bookstore.
Right, because there's a heck of a lot of it, so it gets its own section.
Yeah, so why would I hesitate to use historical fantasy because that doesn't feel quite right either. But why would, for lack of a better word, why would historical fantasy be considered historical fiction?
Okay, well, let me look up the definition of historical fiction.
We don't need to argue this too hard. We've gone past the real person fan fiction question that I wanted to put. I just thought it was an interesting discussion topic.
Well, no, I love the idea that you don't think fantasy is a subset of fiction. All books are either fiction or nonfiction. All fantasy books are fiction.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that.
So it can still be historical fiction. That's just like the flavor of fiction.
I just think historical fiction has a narrower definition.
According to Goodreads, historical fiction presents a story set in the past, often during a significant time period.
That's a very broad definition.
Yeah.
What is Outlander considered? Outlander is considered historical fiction. I don't know.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously there are more specific genres inside of that. It's also definitely horror. But, ooh, wild card. Isn't it a little bit sci-fi? One of the things that I really loved in this book was using partially the sort of weird science around in the Romantic era, but also incorporating some of these concepts that we understand into these mythologies that are familiar to us. For example, vampires are all about electrons? Okay. I'm on board. Let's go.
I mean, like I said, it was a unique take on vampires.
Oh, I loved it. The monsters in this book were so good. I almost don't even want to call them vampires. Well, they were in the idea that they fed off of the life energy of humans.
Yeah.
And they were also extremely violent and sexual in the way that vampires have always been depicted. But they're also sometimes giant snakes and also sometimes stone statues. So, but that was a really cool melding of several different mythologies.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the snake people are Lamia from Greek mythology, and the stone giants are biblical, I believe from the Old Testament.
I think so, yeah.
And this like mixing of different sources to create a new vampire that is all of them. I also have gotten tired of virus vampires.
One sees an awful lot of that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that one of the books we're reading for our next episode is
no.
a virus vampire.
I don't hate it. It just feels like the basic bitch of vampires.
It's a little tired by now, that trope.
Yeah. And so having them go back to a more conceptual, spiritual creature, like vampires are an entire other creature. That was just really fun. I really loved it.
They were good vampires. I mean, not good in the sense that they were like, you know, all sunshine and rainbows. They were very much not that. But as authorial constructs, they're great.
This book was also absolutely, definitely horror.
It was very, very horror.
Which, again, it's nice to have vampires be scary again. I'm going to throw that out there. But
counterpoint, I didn't actually find the vampires themselves all that scary.
I did, but we just had a discussion about how I get something very different out of horror than you do.
This is true. Yeah.
Revisit that.
Yeah.
It's definitely the mind control. It's not really mind, the influence.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Vampires have a supernatural influence over their victims. And that is that loss of free will and then not even knowing what your free will is absolutely horrifying to me.
I mean, I agree with that. I don't disagree with anything that you've said. I just don't find it. When you say horror, I think something that I find uncomfortable, that I am uncomfortable reading, and that I am not uncomfortable reading.
But eyes getting poked out, that's uncomfortable. I mean, yeah, also that.
I mean, it was pretty unexpectedly gory. I was not expecting this level of gore.
No, I literally only knew that this was, quote, that vampire book, end quote, before reading it. So I was not prepared either. There is some graphic violence.
Yeah, like there's a scene with a character losing an eye, and then there's another scene with a character biting his finger off, like actually like biting through the bone. And I can read that, but I was not prepared to read that.
There's a lot of eyeball stuff in this book.
Yeah.
Like, I know that eyeballs are a specific thing for some people. So if that is something that you can't handle, don't read it. Okay. Speaking of things I have a soft spot for, Lord Byron. I do love the romantic poets, though.
They're pretty great. I'm partial to Shelley just because our grandfather was a Shelley scholar. I have a lot of his books.
Absolutely.
I have not read them, but
no, Shelley was great. I think Byron kind of hits that over the top vibe that I really love. Like, he was just so all-in ridiculous.
Byron is quite dramatic.
Yeah, I love it.
Something that I really enjoyed was we get to see them at Villa Diodati. And there's a Doctor Who episode that came out a couple of years ago that shows that same setting and that same scene.
Evening.
Yeah, that same evening, but from a very Doctor Who perspective.
So, historical context. The Villa Diodati is the place where Byron Shelley and Mary Shelley, who is not Mary Shelley yet.
Mary Godwin.
Yeah. All of this is to say, wrote Frankenstein. Because after a very spooky night in a villa in the Swiss Alps, Byron said, we should all write horror stories together, or we should compete and see who can write the best horror story. And Mary Shelley's was Frankenstein. And so it's a very fascinating historical moment.
That both Doctor Who and Tim Powers play off of.
I think also an aspect of the Romantic poets is they wrote so many letters about stuff. So we know all of this shit, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it would be like someone having access to all of your texts.
Your live journal.
Yeah,
back in the
exactly.
day. Your tweets.
And so we have so much material.
Yeah.
We know so much about maybe not what actually happened, okay, but
what they said happened.
Yeah, what they said happened, and from different perspectives, and how they described it to different people. Like the resource of letters from this era. I mean, more eras, of course. Letters are a whole thing, but so many of them were preserved from this group of people the Romantic poets, that we just have so much information about them that you can do really cool things like fitting vampires in the gaps. But it works so well because it's anchored in things that we know did happen, like Villa Diodati, or foreshadowing the way Shelley dies.
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't think it's a spoiler because, again, it's historically accurate.
Real person fan fiction.
No, that's more proof that it's historical fiction because it's anchored in reality.
Real person fan fiction can take in aspects of what actually happens.
Sure. Byron's cool, though. He really did have an amethyst skull mug cup thing.
Yeah, he was a little bit extra.
He was so extra. Also, I really like the way this book didn't sugarcoat him, though.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was also definitely a self-centered asshole.
Yeah.
I don't want to give the impression that I thought he was a good person.
he definitely does come off as a self-centered asshole in this book.
And I love that, though.
Yeah.
Because I was also very sympathetic towards him, but at the same time, did not agree with a lot of choices he made.
Nope.
And being able to walk that line is very cool.
I think Powers does a really good job in making us feel for him while also being like, Byron, just,
get over yourself.
Yeah.
I feel like we're not the first people who wanted to tell Byron to get over himself.
Probably not. I imagine lots of people in his day and afterwards have wanted to tell him to get over himself.
I'm sure we won't be the last.
Probably not.
I also like that he was actually bi. That's fun. I feel like that gets forgotten a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this book was written in 1989. It doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like a completely modern book, but...
Yeah, I was going to say it feels like something that was written in the 90s.
I guess.
I mean, something...
89 is close, but...
Yeah.
It feels like a decade ahead of its time. How's that?
But it certainly... It feels... I mean, it still feels relevant.
I feel like we have been bouncing back and forth between older Pratchett books that we have to make some excuses for, and then extremely recent books. And so getting a book that actually falls kind of in the middle is nice.
Does this really fall in the middle, though, if it's 89?
Not time-wise, but progressively, I would say.
Yeah, okay.
Right? I mean...
Yeah, no, I agree. If you're going by progressiveness, then yes, I agree.
And part of that is because it's about the Romantic poets, who were centuries ahead of their time. I'm not going to stop talking about them. I do really like them.
They're pretty great.
Yeah.
I enjoy them.
The polyamory was a little glossed over, but that's because the Shelleys weren't in this book nearly as much.
Yeah, Byron was the main romantic poet of the book.
And he was... Oh no. What's a polite way to say it? A fuckboy?
He was a fuckboy.
Which is not the same thing as polyamory. All right. So one of the really fun things about The Stress of Her Regard by Tim Powers is that there are actual quotes from letters and also the poems written by the characters in this book, but they were written by the real people. And there was, of course, the one that we were both waiting for.
Ozymandias, finally, on page 285. It took us a while to get there. I was waiting the entire book. So when I was in 7th grade, I had to memorize a poem a week.
I thought torture has been outlawed.
7th and 8th grade, I should say, because we did it for both years. And we had to go up in front of the class and recite this poem. That was part of our grade. And then we had to write it out. So over the course of these 2 years, I memorized a poem a week. That's however many poems. The only poem I still recall in its entirety, I'm not going to recite it, but the only poem I still recall from that time is Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley.
You should share the excerpt that was included in this novel.
Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. It's the very last couple of lines.
That's a good poem.
It is a good poem.
That was a mistake. Now I want to read it. All right. Okay. Sarah, why should you read this book?
You should read this book. Well, first, if you like the romantic poets, if you like Byron, you like Shelley, you should read this book.
Oh, hell yeah.
If you like vampires, but are tired of kind of the same old take on them, if you want a new take, you should read this book. Or just if you like horror, but not if eye stuff is uncomfortable for you.
There's a lot of eyeballs, okay?
There are a lot of eyeballs. If you don't like eyeballs, maybe stay away from this book. But otherwise, if you like horror, if you enjoy gore, if you want something that's very spookily atmospheric, you should read this book. Also, I will say that I had a little bit of a hard time getting into The Stress of Her Regard, but I think that's mostly because I was reading during a very warm, very sunny day. And that's just not, like, this book is so atmospheric. That's just not when you should be reading this book.
You're getting called out. You just said you shouldn't read horror books at night, but now you're saying you shouldn't read them on sunny days.
Because,
which is it?
Because I didn't find this book scary.
Okay.
I found it gory, but there's a difference. Like, I wasn't scared by this book.
Interesting. Okay. We definitely are scared by different things in horror.
We are definitely scared by different things in horror. Yeah. So this book, I was fine reading at night. Like, that was better because it felt like the kind of book that should be read at night. I wasn't worried about vampires coming and getting me the way I was about ghosts sticking their arms through the window.
See, but vampires have to be invited. Ghosts can just stick their arms through any window they feel like.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not inviting any vampires in.
Not on purpose, but they could get you.
Unless they look like pugs.
But they could do that to trick you.
I'm not having sex with a pug, though.
I didn't say that. We were talking about inviting them in.
No, but we've talked about how they're very sexual beings, right?
Oh, that's true. That does actually get really, well, I don't want to say messy in this book. There is a child vampire, and we don't see anything, and it's not even confirmed. It's just one character goes.
It's heavily implied.
Yeah, one character questions if the thrall has had sex with that vampire, and it's like, oh, I really hope not. That is there we go. That is horror.
It's horrifying.
Yeah,
certainly.
I think I have much looser genre definitions than you do.
Probably. But see, I'm not disagreeing that this falls into horror.
Right.
Just that I wasn't scared by it.
Okay. Well, I have a lot more comments to make, but before we move on, would you like to share our last quote?
Okay. Our last quote, and I think that this should be kind of the quote for the podcast because it feels very apt. It feels very applicable to us.
And it is by Byron, who is my spirit animal. My spirit poet.
Sure enough, Polidori glanced over at him and frowned. That's your 5th glass of wine today, my lord, and you've only been up for a couple of hours. He cleared his throat. It has been medically and mathematically proven that wine, in excessive amounts, has catastrophic effects in the digestive sphere. When I meet a man with a digestive sphere, Polly Dolly, I'll send him straight to you. What I've got is a stomach, and it's partial to drink.
Cheers, Byron, cheers.
You and me both, Byron.
To avoid spoilers for The Stress of Her Regard, skip to 1:31:24. Okay, the vampires really are so cool in this book, though.
I really enjoy the way that they just change bodies and sex.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're not, it's the same vampire, but a completely different person.
They don't see identity the same way that we do.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very cool.
Mm-hmm. And it's a neat way of playing with, like you said, Byron's bi-ness, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And like he's still having relations with the same vampire, even if at one point the vampire is a man and at a later point the vampire is a woman.
And I would like to say he first meets the vampire as a man. So it's not trying to like do the, oh no, it's just a lady pretending to be a man, so he's so straight. It's not like none of that shit.
Mm-hmm. Although I think that he meets him uncomfortably young.
Oh, well, I also think that's a thing that happened though.
I believe that, but also like Byron.
Oh, we are not here to agree with Byron's life choices.
No.
Yeah, some lord. I'm pretty sure that's an actual thing.
Oh, I believe it is, because so much of what Powers brings into this book actually did happen. I mean, like, sure, he changes some supernatural details, but a lot of it is accurate to real life.
Or one could say history.
Or one could say the real person.
Another thing I really loved in this book was how well details got picked back up later on.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes books do that and it feels like they're trying too hard to end all of the loose ends with a bow.
Mm-hmm.
But in this, I feel like we had some concepts introduced early on, and then they would be sort of echoed or picked back up, but changed a little bit in a very cool way.
Well, there was one thing in particular that I remarked upon in my notes so the main character, Crawford, is a doctor, deals specifically with birthing. I'm sure that there's a term for that.
I think it's obstetrician.
I think you're right. Although that's not a term that's actually used in the book.
No. Well, I don't think it's a term that well, he's also kind of revolutionary, right? Because obstetrics not really a thing back then.
And they certainly weren't a thing done by men at the time. But so he mentions in the beginning, this manuscript that was ostensibly about a C-section, but he thought it was just misfiled because it was like someone putting a statue into a person and not actually like removing a child. And it turns out that manuscript has relevance in the latter half of the book. And I thought initially that was just like building his character's description, like, oh, he's a doctor and he reads all of these things about childbirth, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really liked that had relevance.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of it would have been fine if it didn't come back.
Mm-hmm.
It built his medical expertise, and he got to make fun of doctors who don't care about lady medicine, which, ooh boy, let's not talk about that right now.
That's a whole ass podcast in and of itself.
I think there's probably 3 podcasts already about it. But then it does, like, it's the climax of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not the climax. It's it's how they get the big bad.
Mm-hmm. Like it has an incredible amount of relevance.
Yeah. And that was very good. It was very well done.
It was a very neat tying of loose ends that you didn't necessarily recognize as a loose end that needed to be tied.
Mm-hmm. There are some other really wonderful things too, like the vampire groupies. And that's not quite as dramatic of a callback, but they're introduced at the very beginning before Crawford even really knows what vampires are. Like he doesn't even, I don't think he does at all. Keats thinks he does because he's married to one. And how do you do that on accident? Well, read the book. And so he's brought to a place with vampire groupies and it's a whole thing. But then their sort of role in the book, not specific people, but this group of people who worship vampires to the point where they want to drink the blood of people who had been bitten by vampires. Like they're so desperate.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they come back and Crawford's relationship with them, or the way he approaches them, changes so dramatically. Is just a very cool way of kind of tracking his headspace. Mm-hmm. And also, as he learns more about vampires, his opinion changes so much.
I mean, talk about a character transformation over the course of a book.
Oh yeah.
He goes from kind of one extreme to the other. in terms of his relationship to vampires and his understanding and appreciation of them.
Mm-hmm. This book also takes place over a pretty long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe he just ages super fast. I think maybe a column A, column B.
I think it's a little bit of both. Like, it definitely takes place over the course of years, but also he ages excessively because of the stress that he's under.
Mm-hmm. I really love the way that the invitation thing works. So in typical vampire stories, the vampire must be invited over a threshold into a home.
Usually it's just, at least in the stories that I've read, it's just into a house or a dwelling.
You've seen Buffy, you know vampire stuff. Whereas in this book, a vampire must be invited to the person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes a lot more sense. I mean, obviously it's all magical gobbledygook, but from the idea of they must be invited to feed upon you kind of makes sense spiritually. Like, I get that. Especially because they aren't just drinking blood. Like, they truly are feeding off of life force. There is more metaphysical shit involved.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense in this book because vampires are not specifically or exclusively a physical thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it makes sense in something like Buffy, where it's you have to be invited over a threshold into a dwelling because they're just a physical threat, and you don't necessarily have to invite them into yourself because it doesn't, you know, they're just drinking your blood. They're just concerned with your actual corporeal being.
Mm-hmm.
But in this, they really are taking your life force, and they're not necessarily themselves a physical being. You know, like their form changes between this kind of like snake-like thing, more of a rock thing.
Sometimes they're air.
Yeah.
I think my problem with the threshold is that doesn't make any sense though. Like, why? And I know you shouldn't say, but why? Something like vampires.
Why do vampires have OCD and need to count every grain of rice?
Yeah, well, I like the monsters where there's a reason for stuff.
Mm.
And so where this book takes it and says, no, they're sort of attaching themselves to your soul and they have to be invited to do that. You have to be complicit, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has to be mutual in some way. I just, that feels a lot better to me than neener, you can't step over this line. Unless we're doing God stuff, in which case, yeah, there's none of it makes sense and you're not allowed to ask questions. Okay, great. One of the things I really like about this book is how it does give an explanation for why church stuff scares vampires. There's evidently some truth to the idea that churches are sanctuary. It seems to have something to do with the salt in the holy water, and the stained glass, and the gold patens that they hold under the chins of people who line up to receive communion. The story today is that those metal discs are to catch any crumbs, but they're very highly polished, and Father Pasquale hinted to me one time that they were originally used to make sure that each communicant could cast a reflection.
I do like that. Your page 189 is not my page 189.
Oh, whoops.
I did not realize that until just now. So,
but I just liked that, trying to make sense of it. This book does not accept myth for myth's sake. It tries to pull out the consistencies, and that's the kind of monster I really like.
It's good at that, yeah.
Okay, we take very different things from horror. And one of my favorite, in that it freaked me the fuck out because that's why I read horror, things about this book, and about vampires in general, really, was this construction of abusive relationships. And I sort of mentioned earlier how vampires' supernatural effects can sort of make their victims lose their free will. And so you have that in conjunction with it's basically canon in the novel that the vampires really do love their humans. Like truly, genuinely love them.
They're just bad for them.
Yeah, that doesn't mean they're not killing them though. And so expressing that dichotomy of it doesn't matter if it's love. They're still killing you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that rhetoric comes up a lot in discussions of relationships, oh, but they love me, as if that makes it okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like this depiction of vampires sort of addresses that.
I mean, it's really a textbook definition of an abusive relationship.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and we don't see anything from a vampire's perspective, but certainly all of the characters believe that they really do love their victims.
To be fair, these are also all people who have been victims of vampires.
Yeah.
They may just think that.
They maybe have a little bit of a skewed viewpoint.
That exploration of the loss of free will and also that sort of extremely toxic relationship dynamic is what gives me the heebie-jeebies.
I mean, it's certainly horrifying. Like I'm not arguing there. I just don't. It's not chills down my spine. I can't read this at night kind of horror. It's a different kind of horror.
Oh, there was definitely a moment that gave me chills down my spine. I think it was, I don't remember the exact page, but so while Crawford was still actively married to his wife, and while he was swimming in the ocean, he was clear-headed because of the salt water, and just his sort of slow, the way he rationalized it to himself as he emerged from the water. From extremely clear-headed, this is bad for me, I gotta get out, this is terrible, and then the very like pebble by pebble, oh, it probably wasn't as bad as I remember, and there are some benefits, and am I really willing to make such a desperate step? Just that sort of descent back into the thrall of this vampire absolutely put chills down my spine.
Yeah, we find very different things scary.
Fair enough. We talked a little bit about Mary Shelley earlier. Not very much. She's not in this book at all, really.
Yeah, she appears very little, and most of what when she appears, most of what is involved is talking about how she was basing Frankenstein off of Percy Shelley.
Yeah, now this could be biased because I do love Frankenstein. I feel like Mary is the only historical figure who really got the short end of the stick in this book as far as depictions go, but that's just because she wasn't in it.
I did feel, and I mean, I think that there is some historical accuracy here. Like it's not that I think that Powers was just making stuff up. I did feel that there was a little bit of emphasis placed on how much influence she took from Shelley when writing Frankenstein that I didn't really appreciate.
I didn't like that either, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't like the way Mary Shelley was handled. Like, I don't. Is that because I have a soft spot for Frankenstein?
I don't have a soft spot for Frankenstein, and I didn't like it. Yeah. So I think the answer there is no.
It's also kind of just generally accepted that Percy Shelley's edit of Frankenstein, the first edition, is just worse. Like you can buy the original now. Like they've reprinted it, obviously, without his edits, and it's like, yeah, this is a better book. So, I mean, was Percy influential in the writing? Yes. Was that a good influence? Well,
maybe not. Yeah.
Maybe not. But this book isn't about her, so I can hand wave that a little bit. The other major female character, there is more than just these two, I feel required to say. None of them are super involved.
Yes, I wouldn't call them major female characters.
No, there are other female characters.
I thought you said there are other major female characters.
No, but Josephine is a major female character.
Josephine is, yes.
Possibly the only one, depending on how you would define vampires. There's a couple of vampires that are female more often than not, but generally I think they don't really
very few
conform to gender norms.
Well, I was gonna say, even if you count them, there are very few who have like a lot of page space dedicated to them specifically. Like they might show up in scenes, you know, but they're not the focus of that scene.
Well, the main vampire is a woman almost entirely.
But even she doesn't really show up that much.
Not in person, but they talk about her an awful lot. And I think that counts.
They talk about her a lot. I don't know if that counts or not, but I won't argue too much.
Anyway, Josephine. The woman that Crawford was supposed to be marrying when he accidentally married this vampire statue was Julia.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. And she ends up getting ground into a bloody pulp after their wedding night, or during their wedding night, while Crawford is asleep.
Vampires are jealous creatures.
Yeah, they're awful. And Josephine was her twin sister, who was definitely the black sheep of the family. And oh, she just breaks my heart. I think that character is so sad. I think she comes into her own eventually, but
she's very sad. I'm not that fond of her. I didn't really care much for her. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that she had a very sad life and a very hard life, but I didn't find her particularly sympathetic.
Fascinating. So she starts off as the black sheep of the family. Julia dies in her wedding bed. Everyone assumes Crawford did it. That's not crazy. That's pretty fair.
Yeah, valid.
Yeah. So Josephine goes off to sort of hunt him down and murder him. Because she doesn't really have anything going on in her life at all. It's a little bit more complicated than that.
I mean, Josephine doesn't really know who Josephine is. Josephine has multiple personality disorder or something.
This definitely feels like an 80s pop culture version of multiple personality disorder.
And so at times she thinks she's Julia. At times she thinks she's Josephine. At times she thinks she's just a machine.
And all she's doing is hunting down Crawford.
Mm-hmm.
Until the midpoint of the book, which also this book was very long. It's not that long, but there's a lot that happens.
I mean, it's 430 pages or so, or the version that I have is, and it felt much longer than that.
Yeah, but not that it was a slog, but just so much happens.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't hard to read. It just felt long.
When Crawford and Byron go up to the top of the Alps, because that's a place where if you get there, your vampire no longer is connected to you. It's a divorce, they call it. So they get up there, and Julia comes with to kill him.
Josephine?
Sorry, Josephine. Thank you. And she ends up saving their lives. And that is sort of the turning point in their relationship. And they do end up getting together. Yeah, I was a little torn on her character. I think I liked her better than you did.
Possibly. I mean, it sounds like you liked her better than I did.
Yeah.
Not that I disliked her exactly. I just didn't. I understand. So she and Crawford in the end, like they end up together. And I can kind of understand that because they have all of these shared experiences, these shared traumatic experiences that bring them closer together. But I didn't actually feel like they loved each other. It was more like I don't want to say a marriage of convenience, but like a partnership of convenience. Like we're here and we've experienced the same things. So I guess we'll stay together.
Well, how could you be with anyone else after you've gone through those things?
You don't have to be with someone.
Okay. These are people who want to be with someone. And do they have other options? Not really.
I mean, I don't know. I didn't find their relationship particularly compelling.
I liked their partnership quite a bit. when they teamed up to be vampire hunters together. That was great.
That was good. Like if they had stayed like that, and if Julia hadn't Josephine. if Josephine hadn't gone back to like let her vampire in again. But I was like, at that point, I was like, okay, Josephine, I'm done with you.
Yeah, I didn't love that moment. That felt like a plot device just so that there could be a further complication.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my biggest question was, did she feel like a character in her own right, or was she just a plot device?
Well, does she actually pass the Bechdel test?
No. But I don't think the Bechdel test is the end-all be-all.
It's not. You're right.
Does she have agency? Does she make decisions for herself? Does her contribution to the plot extend beyond, like, helping men? And I would actually say the final scene, it's her skills as a nurse that make them able to win the day.
But all of her actions hinge around helping a man.
All of her actions hinge around her obsession with her sister.
That's true too. But the end result is that it all like focuses on a man.
True. But I think it is it being the source. She's not obsessed with Crawford. She's obsessed with Julia. And I think that's maybe a small but important distinction.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
You get what I'm saying? I don't know. She did make choices.
She doesn't realize that she's obsessed, that her actions have been fueled by her obsession with her sister versus her obsession with Crawford until the very end, though.
No, but she's a very damaged person. That's okay. I think it's on the line, I would say. But I think overall, I fall on the side of, I do think she feels like a real character. But I don't know. I could be swayed either way.
I feel like she has points where she stands on her own, but her depiction of or the depiction of mental illness that like is so integral to her character in the beginning is very, very dated.
Oh, definitely.
And it all still, even if the impetus for her actions is her obsession over her sister, it still manifests in her being obsessed with a man, and everything she does kind of like ends up focusing on how she can interact with him and push him, that it does feel like she's much more well-rounded than your normal female plot device, but I still feel like she falls a little bit on the plot device side and less as a character side.
I think she's on the line. I think it would be less bad if the entire last quarter of the book didn't hinge on, but she's pregnant. Oh no.
Yeah.
That was why I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Let's not with this.
Yeah.
Okay. Josephine, I'm not sold that she's just a plot device. I think she does stand alone. But children in this book are basically lampshades.
And I'm fine with that. I'm not a kid person. They could be lampshades.
But they're not. They're just people who are farther away. I don't know, especially since we read The Legacy of the Brightwash earlier this year, which has a
fully formed, an
actual small human being. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't see anyone like Caradwyn in this book.
And there are kids in this book. Like, it's not like, it's because there's no kids that show up. But there
are kids, yeah.
And they are purely 100% plot devices every time.
Basically.
From Byron's daughter Allegra to the Hunt children, who are just like tiny monsters, to Josephine's theoretical fetus. I guess not theoretical because we see their kid at the very end. But At the time, they didn't have a pregnancy test. They didn't know.
They were pretty sure.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, the children in this book were. Speaking of romantic poets, this is just a dumb, silly factoid, but there are quotes from romantic poets scattered throughout this book. Obviously, a very core part of this story.
One of the
poets, I know, right? Shock. One of the poets in this book, quoted in this book, is William Ashbless. And Sarah, I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
I know the name.
It's a trick question. He doesn't exist.
No. I was gonna say
okay.
because that's isn't that the name that Tim Powers and who's the other guy?
James Blaylock.
Yeah, James Blaylock. Like that's the they came up with him together.
Yeah, they used it as a pen name for work they had written together, and they published under that name in college, I think. And he, as a character, as a poet, shows up in both of their works, and so that's just really fun.
A nice little gem for those in the know.
It's just an absolute delight. A cool Easter egg. And I just love how subtle it is in this book. You know, you got your Keats, you got your Shelley, you got your Ashbless, you got your Byron. Then it's just good. I don't know. That's the kind of nonsense that I really love.
That's a nice kind of nonsense. I appreciate that.
Yeah. A very low stakes prank.
Yes, I found it.
Yes,
I found it.
I was about to give up.
I knew, because this is otherwise a fan fiction that I really enjoy, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's well written, it's well plotted, it's entertaining reading. I like it. But at the end of every chapter is an author's note that really just bothers me. And it says, grammar and spelling errors are an aesthetic choice. And like, I don't mind someone saying, I'm writing this for myself. Please don't comment on grammar and spelling errors. I don't care. That demotivates me. I just want to write this.
Yeah.
That's totally fine. But for some reason, saying that it's an aesthetic choice just seems really like preemptively uppity.
Well, honestly, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, I don't. They're trying to stop people from commenting on it by claiming it's on purpose. But what they really mean is, stop telling me about it. I don't care.
Yeah.
But they're trying to like circumvent that. And it's no.
And I don't care if someone says, stop telling me about it. I don't care. That's totally valid. This is fan fiction.
Yeah.
But if you say it's an aesthetic choice and you're doing it on purpose, you're not.
No.
You're not doing it on purpose.
Well, okay, unless they're doing something revolutionary that you're not telling me with like the formatting of the story. Maybe it's some beat poetry shit where like the shape of the words is the image of Voldemort's face. I'm assuming this is Harry Potter fan fiction.
It is Harry Potter fan fiction. No, they're not doing anything like that. It's not like the when I was much younger, I read a Pirates of the Caribbean fan fiction where the author didn't use the word
on topic for today.
It is very on topic for today, given the author that we've just discussed. But I read a Pirates of the Caribbean fan fiction where the author didn't use the letter E.
What?
And they wrote a whole ass like retelling of Pirates of the Caribbean. It was very good, or at least as good as anything without the letter E can be.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was incredible. And that was a totally like if they had weird word choices, yeah, because they weren't using the letter E.
Yeah, they're pulling a stunt.
Yeah.
And that's great. I love stunts.
But this has no such conceit. It's a normal story, well written. I enjoy it, but that author's note at the end just no.
Well, I have to ask, have you found errors? I feel like they'd stand out even more if there's supposed to be an aesthetic choice, I would find one and go, what is she doing here?
Well, no, because this is a work in progress. So I'm only, I'm reading it chapter at a time, and I don't remember that this is the story with that author's note until I get to the very end. And I don't remember, errors that long.
That's fair. But if someone did go through and read, I know I would be so much more sensitive to errors if I was
critical, yeah,
expecting them to be an aesthetic choice. Really? You think a lowercase I looks that much better than a capital I? Well,
yeah. Every time I see that, and like I said, I really enjoy this story otherwise, but every time I get to the end of the chapter and see that, I'm like, oh God, this just puts me off entirely.
Yeah. I wonder if they were getting a lot of criticisms about
it's on their first
sentences
chapter
or something.
But no, like it's generally well written. Like it doesn't have anything.
Well, my argument was going to be sometimes run-on sentences are well written and they're technically grammatically incorrect. But as this author said, it's on purpose.
Okay, that's a fair and valid point. But like there's nothing that I necessarily pick up on as particularly egregious.
Yeah.
When reading the story. It's just, they're human. They sometimes make mistakes. I don't know if they have a beta reader or any sort of editor. They might just be posting this as it's written, which is totally fine. It's fan fiction.
Yeah.
Right?
You get what you pay for.
Yeah. But they just have this preemptive author's note, which I feel gives off a very different feeling than what they actually want to convey.
It feels really aggressive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not quite the right word, but
it's antagonistic though.
Yeah, definitely. It's not, hey, like, please work with me here.
It's even, like we said, it's even not, I just don't care.
Yeah.
Which is valid.
That would have been, like, I don't care, so let's all like have a good experience and stop complaining.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you think I'm wrong? Well, actually, you're the one who's wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a good thing they're at the end and at the beginning. Otherwise, I don't think you could get through any of it.
If I had seen that like first thing when I was trying to read the story, I probably would not read it because it would just bother me.
Yeah.
And as it is, like if I ever want to reread the story, that's going to be a little rough because it's on every single chapter.
That's so weird. Have you ever looked at the comments and been like, yeah, there are a lot of people complaining about dumb shit. Maybe I like semicolons. Fuck off.
So looking at the comments on chapter 1 right now, there's nothing about anything like it's all just universally positive.
Wow. Do you remember, this is a blast from the past, people posting no flames at the ends of their chapters? Flames referring to rude, mean reviews. The idea that it's almost like doing the sign against the evil eye. By saying no flames, you stop people from being mean? Has that ever worked?
It maybe works a little bit.
Maybe. That's what it reminds me of, though.
Yeah, I can see that, actually. I can see that.
But at least no flames is genuine. They're saying what they want.
Yes.
Instead of trying to trick you into thinking that, I think honestly that's what it is. I just don't believe it.
I agree. Like what they're saying is, I don't care if I make grammatical errors, which fine, but that's not what is actually coming out of their mouth.
Right.
Or, out of their fingers. That's
Whatever.
not what they're...
Same thing. But now I'm imagining a monster with finger mouth.
Now that's very much horrifying.
You're welcome. Well, Sarah, do we have any announcements before we say goodbye to our lovely listeners?
Well, before we do our regular outro, or as part of our regular outro,
I know, we'll rewrite it eventually.
we will rewrite it eventually. Boy, that's hard to say.
Yeah, say it 10 times fast now.
No, thank you. We have two things. We have a Discord, and I imagine we'll link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, that sounds good. Because can you even, like, the link is probably some awful string of numbers.
Yeah, I don't think that it would make for good listening, for one thing.
No, but we can explain that Discord is a sort of social media site, but more like instant messaging it's chat rooms. It's chat rooms. We made a chat room.
Yes. we have a Fiction Fans chat room where we talk about all sorts of things, but mostly about the next version of Dune that we're going to watch as a group.
Yeah, we're doing some fun, like, watch with us. Everyone, like, instant messages while we watch at the same time. It's fun. Dune's wild. That show is nonsense. But we've been watching a couple different adaptations, and it's been a good time.
And I think we have plans to watch Dogma, for example. And so we've got some fun stuff coming up.
You're going to force us to watch Spice World.
I will, if I can find a good version online.
Fair.
Or if we make enough money on our new Patreon that I can buy an external DVD player.
What a slick segue.
You're welcome. Thank you for providing me with, I mean, unintentionally maybe, but providing me with the intro to that.
It's a soft launch. I'm going to say that before we say anything else. This is not a full launch of our Patreon.
Yeah, this is basically we are trying to figure out how Patreon works, and we are still figuring out a content schedule and what you're going to get content list.
But we do have some things that we're going to be posting pretty soon. So it's not like if you sign up now, you won't have anything. It's just more of a grab bag situation.
Yes, you get what there is rather than, a full-fledged offering.
We do know that we are going to be doing some Patreon chosen books next year. So if there's a book you want us to read or listen to us argue about, that's a great place to do it. And then a lot of our content is probably going to be us reading dumb shit to each other while shit-faced.
So if that sounds like a good time,
maybe we can include a little clip at the end of the outro after this of one of our...
A teaser?
Yeah, this is what you have to look forward to.
If you want to listen more, head over to our Patreon.
I guess that will probably be in the show notes as well.
I think we should link to it in the show notes. But if you don't want to read the show notes, it is patreon.com/fictionfanspod.
And we'll see you there, hopefully. And if not, yeah, I don't blame you. And also, thank you for listening to our episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us on Patreon too. We're on Twitter and Instagram @FictionFansPod. On Patreon too.
And Discord.
You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and join our Patreon and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated.
Bye. What you are about to hear is terrible.
It's so bad.
Oh, but Sarah did find some awful Twitter thread and insisted on reading it out loud to me. I had a great time. Hopefully you will too. This is just a little excerpt of the kind of stuff we're thinking of including on our Patreon.
Covered body. And from across the way, he couldn't help but notice she has eyes. Curtis thought to himself, but not too many. While she stood in line, he covertly checked out her butt. It was a good butt. Round and not not covered in any. I can't even say it. Round and not covered in any
Centipedes? Are you saying centipedes?
Round and not covered in any centipedes. His simple gaze made her mossy bank call out in a rush of liquid. Not like a not like a river, more like when you accidentally pee a little. Her vagina